Denis Davidov was a bold Russian warrior, poet, and rebel, a true adventurer who lived for battle and storytelling. He led daring guerrilla raids against Napoleon, changing Russia's military tactics forever. His poetry was wild and full of life, earning praise from great writers like Pushkin. Though his writings were censored, his legacy endured. This memoir, now fully translated into English for the first time, brings his thrilling first-hand stories to life, his battlefield victories, his fearless tactics, and his role in the Napoleonic Wars, a forgotten hero finally rediscovered. These are his words. Let's begin. From 1807 to 1812, I was an adjutant in the service of the late Prince Peter Ivanovich Bagration. In Prussia, in Finland, and in Turkey, I was in constant attendance on this brilliant commander. When circumstances interrupted his active service, he left me, at my request, with the army. Thus, I completed the course in advanced tactical formations under General Kulnev in 1808 in northern Finland, and again with him in Turkey in 1810, under the leadership of Count Kamenskoy. By 1812, the days of learning were over. As crisis gripped the motherland, each of her sons had to contribute his own particular expertise and talents. I begged the prince for permission to join the ranks of the Akhtirka Hussar Regiment. He commended my fervor and wrote to the Minister of War. On the 8th of April, I was reassigned as a lieutenant colonel to that regiment, which was then deployed to the town of Lutsk. On the 18th of May, we marched off to Brest-Litovsk, and on the 17th of June, our regiment was stationed near Bialystok. On that day, the retreat commenced, and until I was assigned to become a partisan, I remained with the regiment, commanding the 1st Battalion, which participated in the engagements near Mir, Romanovo, and Dashkova, and in all the advanced skirmishes right up to Gzhatsk. Realizing that I was no more useful to our country than a simple rank-and-file hussar, I decided to ask for a separate command, in disregard of the much repeated and generally observed rule: never ask for an assignment nor refuse one. On the contrary, I was convinced that in our profession, the only way to fulfill one's duty is to step forward from the ranks and volunteer for assignments rather than merely remain in line with the others. With these thoughts in mind, I wrote a letter to Prince Bagration in the following terms: Your Excellency, you are aware that when I left the position of being your adjutant, so flattering to my pride, and joined the Hussar Regiment, I had in mind partisan warfare, which is better suited to my age and experience, and, if I may say so, to my daring. Circumstances at this time find me in the ranks of my comrades, where I have no will of my own, and therefore am unable to undertake or carry out anything remarkable. Prince, you are my only benefactor. Allow me to appear before you and outline my intentions. If they should find favor in your eyes, please put me to use according to my wishes, and rest assured that the person who was called adjutant to Bagration for 5 years in a row will assuredly uphold this proud title with all the fervor that the calamitous state of our country calls for. Denis Davidov. On 21st August, the prince called me, and when I appeared before him, I explained to him the advantages of partisan warfare in the present circumstances. The enemy is marching along in one direction, I said to him. This extended advance has lost all sense of proportion. The enemy's transports of food and military supplies are stretched over an area from Gzhatsk to Smolensk and beyond. In the meantime, the vast extent of that part of Russia, which lies south of the road to Moscow, suits not only the twists and turns of individual units, but our entire army. What are the crowds of Cossacks doing in the vanguard? Leaving enough of them to man the posts, we should divide the rest into detachments and send them to strike at the heart of the cavalcade following Napoleon, should strong forces be sent against them. They have enough space to avoid destruction. What if they are left alone? The enemy army's sources of strength and sustenance will be destroyed. Where will it find ammunition and food? The country to either side of the road is not sufficiently fertile to sustain 200,000 troops, nor are the ordnance and gunpowder factories situated anywhere near the old Smolensk road. Moreover, the reappearance of our troops among the peasants who have been displaced by hostilities will encourage them and transform the military conflict into a people's war. Prince, I will speak frankly. I am disheartened by this strategy based upon parallel positions. Surely we must realize that these will not protect the vital heartlands of Russia. Everyone knows that the best method of defense against this direct attack is not to dispose our army in a parallel line, but at right angles, or at least at an oblique angle, to the enemy advance. If we persist in the pattern of retreat chosen by Barclay de Tolly and continued by Prince Kutuzov, Moscow will fall, peace will be signed there, and we shall all march off to India to fight for the French. I continued, as if speaking to myself, if I have to die, let it rather be here. In India, I will disappear with 100,000 other Russians, unknown and useless to the motherland. At least here, I can lay down my life under the flags of freedom, which will rally the people, oppressed by the godless enemy. But who knows? Maybe our army is destined to fight in India. Here the prince interrupted my flight of fancy, shook hands with me and said, I will go today without fail to see the commander-in-chief and present him with your ideas. On this particular day, Kutuzov was busy, and so the prince postponed his talk until the next day. Meanwhile, we reached Borodino. These fields, this village, were more familiar to me than to others. Here I had spent the carefree years of my childhood and felt the first stirrings of my heart for love and glory. But in what condition did I find the home of my youth? My father's house was hidden by the smoke of bivouacs, rows of bayonets glistened in the fields about to be harvested, and masses of troops swarmed over the hills and valleys where I had grown up. Everything had changed. Bundled up in a military coat, a pipe between my teeth, I lay down under a clump of trees behind Semenovsko, denied a corner in my own house or even in one of the barns now occupied by staff officers. In the evening, the prince sent his adjutant to fetch me and told me, the commander-in-chief has agreed to send one detachment round to the rear of the French army, but since he judges the outcome of this undertaking to be doubtful, he has assigned only 50 hussars and 150 Cossacks. He wants you to take charge of this affair. I answered him, I would be ashamed, Prince, to propose a risky venture and let someone else carry it out. But to do any good, it is really too few men. He will not spare any more. Well, I will take that number. Maybe we can pave the way for larger detachments. That is exactly what I expect of you, said the prince. On the other hand, I cannot imagine what the commander-in-chief is so afraid of. Is it worth economizing with a few hundred men when, if all goes well, he could smash the enemy's essential supplies and transports, and if not, risk losing only a handful of soldiers? What is to be done? War is not waged so that we can all kiss and make up. Believe me, Prince, upon my honor, the detachment will be safe. All we need for these raids is daring, determination if the going gets rough, and vigilance whenever we stop or rest. I will make sure of that. But seriously, this is too few men. Give me 1,000 Cossacks and you would see wonders. I would have given you 3,000 to start with because I do not like messing about. But there is no use talking. The field marshal himself has fixed on the number to go. We have to obey. Then the prince sat down and wrote my instructions in his own hand, as well as letters to Generals Vasilchikov and Karpov, the former to assign to me the best hussars and the other the best Cossacks. He asked if I had a map of the Smolensk region. I had none. He gave me his own and blessed me, saying, Go with God. I rely on you. These words I have always remembered. Having received 50 hussars and 80 Cossacks, in lieu of the 150 promised, and 5 other officers, I marched off through the villages of Sivkovo, Boris, and Igorievsko, and from there to Medin, Azarovo, and Skugorevo. This last village was situated on a hill, which overlooked the neighboring area, so that on a clear day, one could see out to a distance of 7 or 8 miles. This hill adjoins a forest, which stretches almost to Medin, and could easily conceal the troop movements of my party or offer a hiding place in case of defeat. I chose Skugorevo as my first base of operations. In the meantime, the enemy army was streaming towards the capital. Innumerable carts, transports, convoys, and marauding bands followed behind them on both sides of the road for a distance of 30 to 40 miles. This multitude, subject to no form of discipline, committed all manner of violent excesses. A broad band of territory had been laid waste, consumed by fire, and whole communities were fleeing from the onslaught with their remaining possessions, headed nobody knew where. As for my party, it is important to stress that our progress was becoming increasingly dangerous. As we put more distance between us and the army, even places left untouched by the enemy posed many difficulties for us. Local volunteer militia groups habitually barred the way. In every village, the gates were closed. Young and old manned them with pitchforks, pikes, hatchets, and sometimes firearms. As we approached each settlement, one of us had to ride up and parley with the inhabitants, telling them that we were Russians, that we were coming to help them and to protect the Orthodox churches. Often, the reply came in the form of a shot or an axe thrown at us. Providence saved us from these missiles. We could have skirted the villages, but I wanted to spread the word that troops were returning, strengthen the determination of the peasants to defend themselves, and persuade them to inform us of approaching enemy troops. Once we had explained matters to the villagers, we were free to enter the streets. There, the atmosphere changed, and as soon as doubt gave way to realization that we were Russians, bread, beer, and cakes were offered to the soldiers. After peace was concluded, I often asked these villagers, "Why did you suppose we were French?" They invariably answered, "Well, you see, my dear sir," pointing to my uniform, "they tell us this resembles their outfits." But do I not speak the Russian language? Well, you know, sir, they have all kinds of people in their ranks. Only then did I learn by experience that in a people's war, one must not only speak the local language, but also adopt their ways and their clothes. I put on a peasant smock, let my beard grow, and instead of the Order of Saint Anne, I hung an icon of Saint Nicholas around my neck and began talking to the people in their own dialect. Yet these dangers were insignificant compared to those lurking in the areas occupied by enemy units and transports. Our party was inevitably outnumbered by the convoys guarding the transports and even by marauding bands. At the first rumor of our arrival in the Vyazma area, strong detachments were sent out to hunt us down. The villagers, disarmed and petrified of the French, were therefore not inclined to wait and see. Disaster loomed everywhere. To be on the safe side, we spent the day in the heights near Skugorevo, hidden and on the alert. Towards evening, not far from the village, we laid out campfires. Farther out, but opposite the place where we planned to bed for the night, we prepared other campfires, and finally, having entered the forest, we spent the night without fires. If we happened to meet a passerby, we detained him and kept him under guard until we went out on an expedition. If he managed to disappear, we changed our base again. Depending on the distance to the place that we planned to attack, we would start our search 1 to 3 hours before sunrise, and having intercepted and destroyed the enemy transport, which we could cope with, we would find another target. After this attack, we would return to the safety of our forest, using circuitous roads, which would gradually bring us on a roundabout route back to Skugorevo. Thus, we fought and moved from place to place from 29th August to 8th September. Learning that the village of Tokarevo had been invaded by a band of marauders, we attacked it at sunrise on the 2nd of September and took 90 prisoners together with their convoy of pillaged possessions. The Cossacks and the peasants had hardly divided the spoils among themselves when sentries, established secretly outside the village, signaled the approach of another band of marauders. This village lies on the slope of a hill near the shore of a small river, Vori, and that is why the enemy failed to spot us as they marched towards Tokarevo without the least precaution. We mounted our horses, hid behind the wooden huts, attacked from all sides with much shouting and shooting, broke into the middle of the convoy, and took 70 more prisoners. Then I called the villagers together and announced to them the expected arrival of a great number of our troops to help the Uknovsky and Vyazemsky townships. I distributed among the peasants the muskets and ammunition seized from the enemy, convincing them to defend their property and instructing them on how to deal with the bands of marauders who, for the time being, outnumbered them. Receive them in a friendly way, I told them. Do plenty of bowing, because not knowing Russian, bows will be better understood. And bring out all you have in the way of food, and especially drink. Put them to bed drunk, and when you see that they are properly asleep, grab all their weapons, which are usually stacked in the corner of the hut or outside in the street, and do what God has ordained against enemies of Christ's church in your motherland. Once you have wiped them out, bury their bodies in the animal barn, or in some inaccessible place in the woods. In any case, take care that the spot where they are buried will not stand out because of recently dug up earth, a pile of stones, logs, ashes, or whatever. As for all the military uniforms, hats, belts, and so forth, either burn it or bury it in the type of place where you bury the bodies. Take this precaution, otherwise another band of robbers will be sure to dig in the freshly dug earth, thinking to find money or valuables. And you, the village elder, keep an eye on everything and see that there are always 3 or 4 lads in the square who, when they spot a force of Frenchmen, will be ready to mount horses and gallop in different directions to find me so that I can come to your aid. God wills that Orthodox Christians should live peacefully among themselves and not betray one another to the enemy, especially to the sons of the Antichrist, who do not spare even the Lord's churches. All that I have told you, repeat to your neighbors. I did not dare to issue these instructions in writing, fearing that they might fall into the hands of the enemy, and inform them about the methods I had suggested to the villagers on how to exterminate foragers. After this, having rebound the prisoners, I put them in charge of a non-commissioned officer, 9 Cossacks, and 20 or so villagers. The whole convoy was sent to Ukhnov to be handed over to the town's administrators against a signed receipt. I ordered these Cossacks to await our party in Ukhnov. Although I knew that with such small numbers, I dared not remain for long in an area swarming with the enemy, I was eager to tempt fate once more with a handful of comrades and challenge the impossible. I felt that my duty was not to defeat vagabonds, but to destroy the French army transports of food and military equipment. Therefore, having broadcast the instructions given to the Tokarevo peasants in all the villages through which we marched, I veered off in the direction of Sarajevo-Zaimysha, which lay on the old Smolensk highway, 1 day's march from Borodino. It was a clear, cold evening. The heavy rain of the previous night had beaten down the dust of the trail we were following and made the ground firm. 6 miles from the village, we came upon an enemy unit, which did not spot us as we rode through a valley near a woodland area and continued on their way without worry. Had I not urgently required fresh intelligence about the village, I would have let this detachment proceed unmolested for fear of allowing one of them to escape and give the alarm to the troops or the convoy stationed there. But I needed an informant, and so I sent 10 riders to intercept them and 10 more to cut them off. Seeing themselves surrounded, they gave up without a fight. They numbered 10 men and a non-commissioned officer from whom we learned that the village was harboring a transport with munitions, together with a convoy of 250 horsemen. In order to take this force completely by surprise, we left across fields, taking cover in clumps of woods and small valleys. Short of the village, however, as we reached the outskirts, we ran into enemy foragers. Seeing us, they fled immediately. We had no time for tactical maneuvers, and so, taking the prisoners and those who could not flee in an emergency, we rode in and out to the enemy with the remaining 20 hussars. Then we galloped into the village on the heels of the fleeing enemy, taking everyone by surprise. Fear has big eyes, and fear goes hand in hand with disorder. On our appearance, everyone scattered. We took some Frenchmen prisoner without weapons or even clothes. Others were dragged out of barns. Only one group of about 30 soldiers tried to put up a fight, but they were routed and quickly cut down. This raid resulted in the capture of 119 men, 2 officers, 10 wagons with food supplies, and 1 with ammunition. The rest fled for their lives. Our booty was placed under guard and promptly evacuated by way of Klimovo and Kozhino, and on to Skugorevo, where we arrived on 3rd September at midday. My party, having been on the move and in action without stop for 30 hours, needed rest, and so we remained there until the evening of the 4th. To rest the horses, I employed the method which I had noted before when serving in the vanguard under General Yurkovsky back in 1807. Detailing 4 Cossacks for 2 sentry posts and 20 for reserve, ready for action at the first shot from the sentries, the other 96 men were divided into 2 groups, and were told to remove the saddles from 2 horses for an hour, to wash and tend to their sores, and allow them to rest. After an hour, these horses were saddled anew, and 2 others followed suit, so that in 24 hours, 96 horses had been refreshed. On the same day, I also gave permission to the reserve to unsaddle 1 horse at a time for 1 hour. On the 5th, we entered the village of Andreyevsko, but on the way, nobody was captured except some 30 marauders. On the 6th, we turned off to the village of Vedorovsko on the old Smolensk highway, still spreading the instructions that I had given to the Tokarevo villagers. On the way, we met a soldier from the Moscow infantry regiment who had escaped from a transport of Russian prisoners. He informed us that this transport, numbering 200 soldiers of the line, had stopped for the night in Fedorovsko, and that its convoy consisted of 50 Frenchmen. We put on speed and had barely reached the village when it became clear that the transport had altered its aspect without our assistance. The prisoners were now the convoy guards, and the soldiers of the original convoy were prisoners themselves. Shortly afterward, I was informed that members of 2 depleted Cossack regiments were wandering about in the area. I also made contact with several officials from Ukhnov and reached that town on the 8th by way of Sudeki, Lukovo, and Pavlovsk. There, I set about the formation of local militia forces and the incorporation of these Cossack regiments into my party. The man who gave me a helping hand in the former project was a local dignitary, Semen Yakovlevich Krapovitsky. A true patriot, despite his advanced age, he not only set a shining example of determination by remaining with his family at this outpost of the Kaluga region, but also displayed willpower and severity in overseeing the supply of arms to the local population, an enterprise in which he was joined by 22 local landowners. The 120 muskets, which my group had captured, as well as a large cart filled with ammunition, were turned over to the first militia group organized and stationed in the village of Znamenskoye on the river Ugra. The second matter required a certain amount of cunning on my part. The Cossack regiments in question had been placed under the authority of the commander of the Kaluga militia, retired Lieutenant General Shepelev. I knew well his good-natured disposition and noble character, but I also counted upon the flattery to his self-esteem were he suddenly to be put in charge of a military outfit. Being certain that a request to incorporate the 2 Cossack regiments into my party would not find any favor were it to become an independent force, I made it appear as if I was placing myself voluntarily under Shepelev's command. I dispatched Lieutenant Beketov to him with an official report from the village of Pavlovsk. In it, I outlined the scope of my operations within the district adjacent to the province supervised by His Excellency, and as far as military operations were concerned, I said that I felt it my duty to serve under his command and make a full report about all that was going on. From Ukhnov, I sent him another courier describing my modest successes and requesting that he intercede on behalf of those who had distinguished themselves. My true reports were sent directly to the official in charge of all Russian armies, General Konovnitsyn. My friend Shepelev was overcome with rapture. He was convinced that I was acting according to his plan, and that he was dealing a decisive blow against the enemy. That concludes the 9th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy this type of content.